For background, I am 32 years old. My mother passed away in 2022 at the age of 67 after a terminal illness. About a year before she died, her health declined rapidly. She became permanently disabled and had to be on oxygen around the clock. During that time, I discovered that my father was being unfaithful to her. He was showing me something on his computer one day, and I noticed a dating website saved in his browser favorites. I never told my mother. I still struggle with that decision at times, but I genuinely believe telling her would have caused severe emotional harm and possibly worsened her condition. At the same time, my brother, who is autistic, was living with them and depended heavily on both of my parents. Carrying that knowledge felt like holding a devastating truth that could collapse my entire family if revealed. I didn't stay silent to protect my father. I stayed silent to protect my mother. She passed away believing she had a loyal husband, and I do not regret allowing her that peace. When she became seriously ill, my father completely fell apart emotionally. He was unstable enough that he needed urgent mental health medication just to function. While my mother was sick, I repeatedly tried to convince my father and his parents that we should move her somewhere with better air quality once she was stable enough to travel. That would have meant either relocating her to her home state on the East Coast, where I live now and where her entire side of the family is, or possibly to the West Coast, where my father's parents live. For years before her illness became terminal, I had begged them to move her away from the extremely dusty area where my immediate family lived. Every suggestion was dismissed. My mother was deeply isolated there, and it was obvious to me that she was unhappy. From personal experience, it's incredibly difficult to build friendships in that area, even with someone without physical limitations. I called my mom nearly every day from her home state, sometimes talking for hours. Once, she quietly told me that I had no idea how much those calls meant to her. It was one of the very few times she ever admitted how lonely she felt. She was a gentle, selfless person who never wanted to burden anyone with her pain. At one point, I was riding to the hospital with my father, trying to understand why relocating my mother was never seriously considered. They had the financial means, so none of it made sense. Then it suddenly clicked. My father didn't want to move because he had another woman in that area and didn't want to leave her behind. I said this realization out loud in the car. He immediately broke down in tears. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to justify himself. That silence confirmed everything, and I felt physically sick. My mother was one of the kindest people I have ever known. She was my best friend, and until that moment, I had never kept a secret from her. Keeping this from her remains the most painful thing I've ever carried. Knowing the truth was one thing. Realizing that it may have directly affected her quality of life was another. Keeping her isolated, far away from her friends and family during what little time she had left, still fills me with anger. After she passed, we brought her back east to be laid to rest. A few months later, about 3 or 4, I was on the phone with my brother. In the background, I heard a woman speaking. I asked who it was, and he casually said her name was Candy, not her real name. I didn't know who Candy was, but at the same time, I knew exactly who she was. My heart dropped. Only 3 months had passed, and the woman my father had been seeing was already in my mother's home. She was being brought around my brother, who is autistic and extremely vulnerable. He doesn't always communicate clearly if something is wrong or if he feels unsafe. After that, I avoided talking about Candy with my father altogether. Instead, I focused on checking in with my brother as gently and consistently as I could. I tried to ask him whether he ever felt uncomfortable around her or if she treated him badly in any way. Unfortunately, his communication relies heavily on repeating phrases from shows or books, so I have no reliable way of knowing what his experiences truly are. Fast forward about a year, my father's parents had been planning a big family trip to Hawaii, something they had talked about my entire life. Around that time, they stopped by my town for a quick visit while on a road trip. During that visit, I brought up Candy and explained just how long she had been in my father's life. Shortly after, the Hawaii trip was canceled, with some excuse about not finding the hotel they wanted. But I knew the truth. Candy had been invited, and the trip was called off to prevent us from meeting her. Now, a couple of years later, 3 years since my mother passed, I still haven't been back to my father's house since right after her death when he wanted us to go through her belongings. Looking back, that was incredibly soon. Candy now lives there. I don't know exactly how long she's been there, but it could have been the entire time. I also haven't visited my grandparents' house on the West Coast since before my mother died. It wasn't possible every year due to cost, but before she passed, my father's side of the family would at least call me on speakerphone once or twice while my immediate family visited them, always telling me they missed me and wished I could be there. These past few years, Thanksgiving has been suspiciously quiet. Not a single call or message from anyone. I didn't even know my father and brother were visiting my grandparents until an aunt texted me out of the blue to say hello and wish I could be there. It hit me then. Why is it always like this at Thanksgiving of all times? And unfortunately, I was right. Candy has been the reason all along. My own family, who accepted my father's partner because she gets along well with my brother, has been excluding me, his daughter, from family holidays. I eventually put all of this together on my own and called my father tonight to confirm it. He admitted that Candy has, in fact, been attending Thanksgiving gatherings for years, while I've never once been invited. Whenever I tried to talk about it directly, my father avoided the conversation and handed the phone to a much younger cousin. I spoke with him briefly before the phone was passed to my grandmother. She tried the usual line about wishing I were there, and this time I didn't let it slide. I told her how strange that was, considering I hadn't been invited in years. I pointed out that I don't receive calls, messages, or any acknowledgement during Thanksgiving week at all, and that this has been happening consistently. When I said it out loud, the pattern became impossible to ignore. They clearly didn't want to hear it. Without me even asking, my grandmother let something else slip. She explained that the Hawaii trip had been canceled because of the situation, essentially confirming what I had suspected all along. I told her I already knew. That explanation alone made everything painfully clear. The Hawaii trip I can almost understand. I don't believe they initially knew Candy had been involved while my mother was still alive, so I can see how she might have been invited without that context. Although I still find it unsettling to invite a new partner on a major family vacation less than a year after a spouse's passing. Thanksgiving, however, feels different. That feels intentional. That feels like a conscious choice. It feels like my family decided it was easier to exclude their own daughter and granddaughter than to deal with the discomfort of my presence. In doing so, it feels like they chose my father's partner over their own family. Over the past few years, my family has been pushing me to get therapy. Don't get me wrong, I do need it, but it really frustrates me that the push feels mostly about keeping me from causing any trouble for them. I've let go of a lot and forgiven a lot. I lost my mother. I didn't want to lose my father, too. I've heard from others in similar situations, a parent with a terminally ill spouse who is being cheated on or abandoned, that many end up cutting ties completely with the unfaithful parent. I can understand that in theory, but in my case, I don't feel like I have that choice. I need to stay involved in my brother's life. I will be his caretaker one day. But right now, I don't feel like this is my family anymore, except for him. I'm obviously hurt and angry, but my grandmother thinks I'm overreacting. She even flies out to visit, talking about how she is here for me and the importance of family, which feels more like guilt than genuine concern. At this point, I'm considering cutting contact permanently, except maybe staying informed about my brother's life and health. Just to add, I highly doubt Candy was unaware of my mother. Mom was mostly homebound, and it would have been nearly impossible to hide her from someone involved with my father. Unless she was extremely naive, she must have known what was going on. I also suspect she may have taken one of my mother's belongings. So yeah, hope everyone reading this is having a happier Thanksgiving than I am. Editing to add, my mom became disabled around 2014 due to a genetic illness that progressively affected her lungs. My father was aware of her health condition before marrying her in the late 1980s. They actually eloped so she could get on his better insurance sooner. By 2014, she was on oxygen permanently and mostly homebound, but she remained herself until her final few weeks in the ICU in 2022. My father had to do a bit more around the house at that point, but it was nothing compared to everything my mom had done while raising my brother and me. I honestly can't wrap my head around how she managed to be such a dedicated mother, work, and endure near debilitating rheumatoid arthritis, which I'm sure worsened her lung condition. My maternal grandmother also died from the same illness. I inherited the genetic variant as well, like my mom and grandmother did, but thankfully there are treatment options available today. Long-winded update. On Thanksgiving Day, I decided to call my family while everyone was gathered together. I waited until I was fairly certain they'd finished dinner, though I'm sure some people will call me dramatic anyway. I had even typed up a letter outlining everything important I wanted to say, but my boyfriend convinced me that it would be safer not to engage in any back and forth without a licensed therapist present. So I called simply to let them know that I would not continue contact unless it was during family therapy with a telehealth psychologist. Of course, it didn't go exactly as planned. I managed to reach my grandmother and asked if she could put me on speakerphone so everyone could hear. "Are you going to be nice?" she asked, as if I'd ever not tried to be. I deflected, asking instead if everyone was present, then made my announcement. My grandmother seemed thrilled when she heard the word therapy, saying she thought it would be a great idea for me. Nope, I told her. If I'm doing therapy, I'm not doing it alone. It's worth noting that since learning about my father's infidelity, my grandmother has done little but make excuses for him. She tries to frame it as ultimately positive, saying my brother benefits from having someone around to help. Maybe that's true in theory, but I don't think it's a good idea to place someone like Candy in that role, or trust her around him. The only person on the call who seemed genuinely supportive was my aunt, by marriage, the same one who had texted me earlier, letting me know that my family was visiting. After I made my announcement, I thought I heard my grandfather mutter something in the background, but I couldn't make it out. My grandmother immediately scolded him, so I could tell it was likely some snide remark, which was exactly what I expected. I managed to hold it together fairly well until my grandmother started talking about how much I missed and how everyone wishes I were there. That's when my frustration boiled over. I pointed out, calmly but firmly, that I had not been invited in years, that they had completely ignored me during Thanksgiving week, and that their avoidance was deliberate. I didn't bring up Candy or my father's affair at that moment. There were children present, but everyone in the room who knew the situation likely understood what I was hinting at. Later, when it was just my father and me, I confronted him directly. I asked why someone who had caused so much pain was welcomed at Thanksgiving while I wasn't even allowed an invite. He tried to defend her, claiming she wasn't a homewrecker, but I wasn't having it. I reminded him, gently but firmly, that I had had to lie to my own mother to protect her from the truth. I said, "You can thank me for that, but Candy very easily could have been a homewrecker. Good women don't pursue a married, sick woman's husband." He stayed completely silent. That's how he always operates. He won't outright deny anything, especially whether she knew about my mother, but his silence says everything. In that quiet, I realized again just how true it all was, and how much this pattern had affected not just me, but the entire family dynamic. I won't pretend to fully understand what it's like to care for a terminally ill and disabled spouse. Honestly, I don't think anyone can know how they would react until they live it. In some ways, my dad was one of the good ones because he didn't completely abandon my mother, but the guilt consumed him while she was dying. One of the only times I ever saw him cry was when I discovered he was involved with another woman. The other times were during my mother's final days or after she passed. After she died, my father and I didn't talk much about her or about Candy. It was just too painful for both of us. He tried to be as supportive a father as he could, though he made sure that Candy and I never had to interact. I know that someday I'll have to meet her. This experience has shaped how I view relationships and love. I can't help but think that if I ever get married, no matter how good my partner might seem, if I became seriously ill someday, there is a chance history could repeat itself. It sounds pessimistic, but unfortunately, it's not uncommon. I've even heard jokes about it. Things like, if a man doesn't bring a date to his spouse's funeral, he's taking things slow. Dark humor aside, it hits too close to reality. What hurts most is that I never issued ultimatums or made demands. There was no me or her scenario from my side. My family seems to have made that decision on their own. The only support I've had through all of this has been my maternal aunt. She has been my anchor, keeping me informed about my brother and relaying any attempts at contact or therapy discussions. Thankfully, my brother has a cell phone, so I can speak to him directly without going through anyone else. Almost everyone else is now blocked. When I tried to push for family therapy, my dad didn't seem serious about it. The call ended with him saying, "We'll talk soon." I reminded him at therapy, and he repeated, "We'll talk soon." Since then, he has reached out to my maternal aunt, and it seems she's managed to get through to him a little. I think my dad finally understands how serious this situation is. I believe that given enough time for everyone to cool off and to schedule therapy appointments, he'll probably be willing to engage eventually. He's not someone who stigmatizes therapy or mental health, but he tends to avoid dealing with his problems directly, so it may take some patience. As for my grandparents, I have a feeling I may never hear from them again. They're likely to find ways to avoid therapy. My grandmother might be willing if she had the choice, but my grandfather won't participate, and as long as he refuses, she won't either. Technically, my grandfather is a step-grandparent, and since he has biological grandchildren from my uncle, whom he adores, he likely doesn't care much about whether I'm involved or not. I want to sincerely thank everyone here for letting me vent and for offering advice. Even though I haven't been very responsive, It means a lot to read your insights and know their support. This has been an overwhelming situation to process, and it's helped to put it all into words. I'll try to provide updates if or when anything changes.